Hi, this is John Dinsmore, Doors drummer, and this is Everything Fab Four on Salon.com.
Welcome to Everything Fab Four, a new podcast focused on fun and intelligent stories about the Beatles. I'm your host, Ken Womack, music culture columnist for Salon.com and a Beatles scholar and historian. No other band, or popular phenomenon for that matter, has enjoyed the global impact of the Beatles. They are part of our human fabric. They created an enduring music that brings people together, and just about everyone has their own Beatles story to tell. Some that are surprisingly deep and unexpected. With each episode, we'll be featuring a new guest to share their Fab Four journey, along with amazing theme music from Black Rabbit. Remember, it's a Beatles world, and everybody has a story.
And his phone started ringing, and my guitar player, Cliff, at the time, he looked down, he goes, I think Paul McCartney's calling you. So my friend picks up the phone and says, hey, come over, Patty Smyth is here with her band, and they just did a show, blah, blah. And so Paul McCartney came over with his wife, Nancy, who's really lovely, and my band was like watching kindergarten kids. They were, and I remembered, you know what I mean? It's like, this is freaking Paul McCartney, and this was a big, huge deal.
Today's guest is Patty Smyth, an American singer-songwriter who came into national renown with the rock band Scandal, before going on to a successful recording career as a solo artist. After growing up in the Brooklyn neighborhood of Gerritsen Beach, Patty joined Scandal as lead vocalist in 1981. The following year, the band released a self-titled debut EP. Featuring the smash hit song Goodbye to You, it went on to become Columbia Records' biggest selling EP, with Love's Got a Line on You also falling into heavy rotation. In 1984, they put out their follow-up, Warrior. Buoyed by MTV Airplay, the album peaked at number 17 on the US charts, and the first song off the release, also titled The Warrior, was a top 10 hit, followed by Hands Tied and Beat of a Heart. With her distinctive voice and new age look, Patty enjoyed international fame during the MTV era. Her debut solo album, Never Enough, was well received and generated a pair of hits in Downtown Train and the title track. In the early 1990s, she reached the top 10 with the hit single Sometimes Love Just Ain't Enough, a duet with Don Henley of the Eagles. She performed and co-wrote with James Ingram the song Look What Love Has Done for the 1994 motion picture Junior. The song not only earned her a Grammy Award nomination, but also an Academy Award nomination for Best Original Song. In 2020, she released her latest solo album, It's About Time, featuring such standout tunes as Drive and Build a Fire. Welcome, Patty Smyth. Greetings, Patty. I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about your Beatles origin story.
I mean, the Beatles were a huge part of my childhood, and I don't know. There's so many pivotal moments in my life, but my mom decided in 1969 to drive across country in a VW bus with me, my sister, a pregnant cat, and a dog. And for some reason, she ran coffee houses, and she was going to open a coffee house in San Francisco. That was her idea. And so the only things we had in the car with us was a turntable and two speakers from I don't know why, that's what she decided to put in the car with us. But she knew, I guess, that she was trying to tame the savage beasts of me and my sister. And we literally listened to Abbey Road for 3,000 miles for a month going and 3,000 miles for a month coming back. I mean, it took us like a few weeks. We probably came home faster, but I'm talking woodshedded the shit out of that record, okay? It's like that's in my DNA for sure.
That must have been some in-depth analysis and listening that was going on in that car.
It must have made my mother insane. I think, bang, bang, Rex rules. When you think about it now, and we just could not get enough. Could not get enough.
That sounds like the makings of like a great young adult novel.
Yeah, it would be a good movie, or it would be. I should write that story. I started writing it because I have written some short stories, but that was crazy. That trip. I mean, it was amazing, and it was right after Woodstock, and we were kids. I was about to go into junior high school, and Route 66. There were still some pieces of it. They hadn't torn everything up, so it was really interesting. It was an interesting thing. And my mom's a badass. I got to give her credit for like packing us up and just trying. But we just totally beat her down, made her come back to Brooklyn. We were like, no, we are not having this.
So the coffee house didn't work out.
No, she never opened the club. I think she felt that we were right. We were miserable. So she came back and kept running clubs in the Village in New York. Thank goodness.
She must have been a serious badass, right? To do that in 1969, where you have all these messages from our culture saying don't do it. I mean, even the attempt is kind of heroic.
Yeah, I know. It was pretty. That's just the tip of the iceberg. I mean, she'd been in the clubs for a lot of years by then. But I mean, yeah, she was pretty amazing with stuff. And, it's funny because who knows how our life would have turned out. It would have been very different. I don't know how, which way I would have gone being on the West Coast. It's just funny when, it's all these small little decisions that you make and these big decisions that you make. And then everything, is changed, like all the way down the road. And you can't really see it. Sometimes it scares me in a way. It's like such a small little move, Like even sometimes, I didn't step off the curb, and then all of a sudden a car comes barreling by. It's like sometimes it seems so random. I know it isn't, but it really does feel that way sometimes.
It really is quite remarkable that you and your mother and your sister were brought to that very particular place, and it involved, of course, the soundtrack of the Beatles.
It is. But I mean, my first album that I requested from my mom, I exhausted her records. I was, 6 probably, was, whatever that album was, Meet the Beatles, I think, with the umbrella, whatever it was, whatever the first album that I became aware of, I think it was that one. And I was like, get me that record. It was my first album. We demanded that album. And that was like the beginning. Very long love affair.
So by the time you got to your Abbey Road car experience in 1969, you were pretty fluent.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yes. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And I guess, and before that was Sergeant Pepper. We woodshedded that, the winter before we left, and I always get mixed up. I think the White Album for us might have come after we came back from Brooklyn, from California. I can't remember, but those 3 albums were just, all of them. Rubber Soul, it was amazing to go on their journey with them, their musical journey, because it was really, just great songs, but then they really kind of just went into their lives and experimented with George Martin. I mean, it's pretty amazing. I count myself, I'm really glad that I grew up when I did. I'll just say that.
Is there a place in your music where you can, when you think about it, or even your origin story as a musician, where their journey had an impact or was a catalyst or something?
I mean, I just feel like, when my sister and I saw the movie Help, and then the other one, there were 2, A Hard Day's Night and Help, it was just, I don't know. I don't remember thinking, I just was totally in love with all of them. And although I didn't want my mom to marry them, I wanted my mom to marry Elvis Presley. I remember that was very clear. Elvis was supposed to, I think I wanted to marry one of the Beatles myself, so I wasn't offering her up to the Beatles. And I knew Elvis was older than the Beatles. But I would say that there was just such impact, such a strong musical impact. It was something that my sister and I bonded over. We had a pretty tumultuous childhood, so a lot of times we were kind of at odds. So for me, I feel like the Beatles were the thing that we really connected over and sang together all the time and tried to figure out how to play on guitar and stuff like that. So I didn't have some major, they're just in there. it's sort of like when I cut, Ode to Billy Joe on this new record. That's a song again from, even before that, when I was, 9 or something, 9 or 10. And I'm like, that song struck such a chord in me that I know that it's one of the building blocks of, without, the unconscious building blocks that we have. And there's got to be a lot of Beatle blocks in there because it's just what I listen to so much. So it's in there without my knowing it. It's like it's unconscious, but it's there.
So it's indecipherable in that way.
I believe so, yeah. I do. Uh-huh. And, it's funny because I've been around a lot of famous people, a lot of, I've met a ton of people in the world, and I've had the pleasure of meeting and hanging out with Paul McCartney. And, so when but I forget sometimes. It's like, oh, he's Stella and Mary's dad, or he's friends with my friends. And I, would find myself sitting there talking to him and forgetting that it was him, And so we did a gig out in Long Island where I am right now at this little club called Stevens Talk House. And Paul was supposed to come to the show, I had heard, but he didn't come. He had a big clam bake with his family out here or whatever. I also feel like he said to me, every time I go to a show, I feel like I have to get up on stage, which is kind of tough, I feel for him in a way that he can't just go and, like, he feels like he has to do it, or something. So anyway, we went to my friend's house, and his phone started ringing. They had a little party for us after the show, and his phone started ringing, and my guitar player, Cliff, at the time, he looked down, he goes, I think Paul McCartney's calling you. So my friend picks up the phone and says, hey, come over, Patty Smyth is here with her band, and they just did a show, blah, blah. And so Paul McCartney came over with his wife, Nancy, who's really lovely, and my band was like watching kindergarten kids. They were, and I remembered, you know what I mean? It's like, this is freaking Paul McCartney, and this was a big, huge deal. And he's such a lovely guy, that he talked bass with my bass player, Tom Welsh, and guitar. I mean, it just was, I think it might have been like really the highlights of their lives because everybody, again, was so influenced by them. So that was a great moment to have. So for me, and to remember, like this, this is a pretty big deal, and I'm pretty grateful just to be able to let my band meet them. I mean, that they just were, it was a really wonderful night and a sweet thing for him to do.
Well, I sure hope you know that your songs have had that kind of effect too. I vividly remember being in high school and playing Goodbye to You really loud, really loudly during a breakup or after a breakup, not during the breakup. That would have been interesting, right?
Yeah. You don't know the kind of letters I got about that song. I like to say, like I write divorce songs. I don't write wedding songs. For whatever reason, most of my songs are like, see ya. I don't know, or sad. So it'd be nice. Maybe one day I'll write like some epic, happy love song.
When did you start writing songs? What was the beginning of that story for you?
I think Zach Smith and Scandal. I started writing songs with Goodbye to You, but because I didn't know, what writing songs was, I didn't really get credit on that song. But it wasn't a finished song, and we needed a single, and so I found, like some words that were in a pile. I said, what is this? And he played me the riff, and then we finished the song, and that became our single, funnily enough. So that's really the first song.
Oh.
that I wrote. Yeah. So where, I got in and, just finished it. It just wasn't finished. And then he really did try to get me to write more than I wanted to. I was just interested in singing in the beginning. I think maybe I was a little afraid, but I always wrote poetry. I always read poetry. I always wrote in a diary. I mean, so I wrote prose, but I didn't think of it because I didn't play an instrument well enough. I didn't know that I could write just by singing melodies and, figuring the chords out later, which is how I do it now. But anyway, so did I answer the question? I don't know.
Oh, no, you sure did.
And that's when I started with him. I mean, he really would encourage, he just wanted to write, and he wanted to write with me. And so I'd say the Warrior record, that was I have a lot of input in those songs, and I guess that was the beginning. But I think I really hit my stride when I wrote Sometimes Love to Stay Enough. When I wrote that song, that was like my kid was 18 months old or something, so it was like 87. I think that's when I don't know what happened when I got in that room with Glenn Burtnick, a New Jersey guy who didn't live too far from your school.
You're absolutely right. Glenn Burtnick is a member of the Weaklings and a great friend of Monmouth University here on the shore.
Yeah. So we, he had that dum 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 or whatever the changes was. I don't think it was that, because I think Roy came up with that synth part. But whatever musical changes he had rolling around in his head, we were trying to write a rock song, and I forgot it was his birthday, and they came in and interrupted us to give him a cake. I thought we had just stopped because we were tired of trying to write this rock song, and then he sat down on the piano and started playing those changes, and I had the idea of, there's a danger in loving somebody too much, and, from just becoming a mom. And we wrote that song. I mean, it just sort of fell out. And that song was one of those things where I was like, sometimes that happens. It's awesome. It doesn't happen that often, but they just fall out. And that was one of them. And I couldn't stop thinking about it. And that's the thing you have to do as a writer too, because, when you're a mom and you got all these freaking kids and a husband who's kind of high maintenance, you can get distracted really easily, but when you've got something dogging you, you got to stick with it to finish it. And, with that, at that point, I didn't really have that many distractions. I just had one kid. It was just me and her. So it was easier for me to stick with that, but I have to remember that, because it's sort of, if the song keeps going around in your head, it's doing it for a reason. It wants to get finished.
We'll be right back with Patty Smyth, who's going to tell us about another unbelievable moment when opportunity showed its hand. And that was the opportunity to perform with Van Halen. We'll be right back. We're back with Patty Smyth. Patty, I'm very intrigued by your work with various producers over the years, and very specifically with Mike Chapman, who produced many of the records that I know were the backbone of my childhood, records by Blondie, The Knack, and others. Can you tell me about what it was like working with him?
I know he did Pat Benatar too. It was great to work with him. I found, he brought the Warrior to us, and he was a very refreshing, but he was very strong personality, which for whatever reason, because I have a strong personality, I was okay with. He definitely called Zach on the carpet and totally, asked him why no one in the band liked him. And I mean, he basically exacto knifed, all the points down to the bare, we're going to make this record, but you're being an asshole, so stop being an asshole, and, that kind of stuff. And because he had worked with so many, so he pushed Benji. I mean, he rearranged a lot of stuff because he's a force. And a lot of it needed to be done. Some could have been done in, with a slightly lighter touch maybe, but I wanted to sing great for him because, he had produced all these bands that I really liked and all these singers that I really liked. And so that was a great feeling, to want to go in there every day and give it my best and make him know that I'm giving my best and have him like it, which he did. That's a good feeling. It's an interesting thing. People don't understand really what producers do, but they're more like film directors, not like, they should be called record directors, not record producers, because they really, for me, I don't like anyone in the studio. I just like the producer there and the engineer. I can tolerate the engineer and the producer because it's a personal thing where I'm going to try stuff and then, I want some feedback. And I remember I went in, over the last 28 years of not having a record, I've gone in a few times and tried to make a record. And I remember one guy saying to me, I'm not a cheerleader. When I said, look, you have to give me some feedback. And he was like, I'm not a cheerleader. I'm like, I don't need a cheerleader. But, when I'm singing the same riff every single time I do a pass, maybe just say, hey, maybe you should mix it up. You need another mind in there who gets you and, and just maybe says, hey, why don't you try this? Or why don't you try that? So that's what a producer does for a singer. And because he had worked with so many great people, I just wanted to, and I did. I went balls to the walls on that record. I mean, so, I laid it all out. And it was because he was inspiring to me, which was great. That was a great singing experience.
I was reading a quote from the late Doug Feiger about they called him Commander Chapman. He really had them, and they were obviously very young. He had really sort of taken over their chemistry, but was unable to do their second album, which he cites as the beginning of the end for the Knack, because they didn't have that person giving them this hardcore structure.
Who knows with him, because when he found out, he really wanted to do the next record with me, and I wasn't sure I wanted to do it. Even though I loved singing with him, I kind of wanted to do something different, a little bit more organic, less kind of so produced. So, and a little bit more, to be honest, I wanted to have a little bit more R&B feel, just more of a swing factor, not just so white rock. And then he said to me, "No, I understand, I get it, I want to do it, let me have a shot at it." So I'm like, "Okay, all right, I'll give you a shot at it." And then I found out I was pregnant, and he stopped returning my phone calls. So that's how he didn't do my next record. And I found out, that he was upset that I was pregnant, and that meant that I wasn't serious or whatever. So that's how that happened.
Wow. What you just said is such an interesting and thankfully lost artifact to time, where someone would make a decision about working with you because you had a life decision that had taken place, a natural life choice of having a child. I mean, think about then versus now, right?
Yeah, but I think now it's weirdly trendy to have kids, But I think that was the case for a long time. Only more recently now it's they make all these jokes. They will make how all these celebrities were adopting or whatever. But now it's not. You're right. It's not such a crazy thing to do. They're way more used to. I was pretty young. I was still in my 20s, so maybe that was part of it. But you're right. There's so many singers with kids now, and they realize, it certainly hasn't affected Pink and the way that she sings and, whatever. But it's changed a lot. Look, they would play one chick a week when I was out. In 1982, when I went to radio stations, that was the rule. One chick. So, that definitely, I'm like, what? You even does it matter if it's a chick or a guy? Well, it definitely mattered.
That's pretty staggering.
That's the biggest change I've seen. Thank God.
Well, and on the other issue, you'd think the driving decision matrix would have been, this last album we worked on together was a massive hit, right? Instead of, oh, I see she's pregnant, I'm not going to work on this. That's really kind of amazing, because today, not only are we, of course, more self-aware and more socially aware about equality and those issues, but I would think the words massive hit would have been the driving matrix, right?
Yeah, he was very, confident and arrogant, and I think he had one more. I think he did "Love Is a Battlefield" after that, because I remember he was playing that for me too. But then, so maybe what came up was that he was going to give it to Pat Benatar, and so that was part of it. And I don't think he thought, that I was going to write, But the truth is I'll be eternally grateful for that, because, like I said, things just happen the way they're supposed to happen. And I would not have written Sometimes Love Just Ain't Enough. I would have been with another batch of writers, or wherever I would have been, so he did me a favor, and it's fine. And, he didn't have a lot. I think after Love Is a Battlefield, I don't know how much he did after that. Not that I followed him, but I don't think he did a whole lot.
No, there is a drop-off for sure. How did you meet Glenn Burtnick? How did you come into that orbit and work together?
Probably publishing company or a manager knew, and they just suggested it, and I was open to trying, writing with people, and I think that's how. It's funny, who you say yes to, and serendipitously for both of us, I was like, yeah, and he said yeah. So, and you never know when you get into a room what's going to happen. And it looked like before we sat down at the piano that nothing was going to happen. So, we were lucky, and we've written some we've written a lot of good songs together, Glenn and I. He doesn't like to write anymore. I've got to like put a gun to his head. I've got to make him come and write with me. I think he just feels like, what's the point? Which is kind of a bummer. But I mean, the point is you write because you can,
I wonder, we were talking about the Beatles earlier. You were certainly a hardcore fan, obviously, with your mother and sister doing that kind of serious listening party for a month. We're nearing the worst date on the Beatles calendar. Do you remember 1980 and where you were?
Yes, I do. Yes, I do. I hate that day still. It's almost like I can't say it's as bad as 9/11, but it's such an awful moment in New York history. Like I was living in the East Village with my then boyfriend was with me. He lived in Philly, but he was staying with me. And it was the Christmas lights were already up all around in the Ukrainian bars and restaurants. And we were getting ready. We were going to go out to eat. And then it came on the radio, the news. So I remember that very specifically, who I was with, where I was. And then I remember being in Central Park. I guess it was the next day or 2 days later. And I just remember how quiet it was. And all you could hear was helicopters overhead. It was awful. In a way, I don't want to recall the date. I hate the guy. I hate that I knew his name. I purposely forgot the guy's name because I think when people commit crimes like that, they shouldn't become infamous. There should be never a photograph or their name ever written or shown anywhere. So that was a big tragedy. That was very shocking.
It's still, even here 40 years later, it makes less sense to me every year.
It's awful, I know. And I live not far from there, like that's where I live. And it's like every time you walk by the building, it's like it's never does it not cross your mind. It's always there. It's weird. It's really weird. And it was so completely senseless. So, I mean, it's just really crazy.
Yeah, it will never make sense to us. When I walk by that archway, I can't talk. My throat closes. I got to ask about, 2020 has been just a god-awful year in so many ways. And then we get the news last week about Eddie Van Halen. You were pretty close friends, right?
Yeah, we were close friends, but we hadn't, really seen each other in a long time. I saw him, when was it, like 2014 or something like that in New York, when him and David Lee Roth, they did a show at like this club and they were getting back together. I hadn't really been in touch with him for a while, I don't know how that happened. It just happens, like your life changes. I moved back to New York, blah, blah, blah. But it was terrible because, I was doing all this press about, and people kept asking me about him asking me to, be in the band. And because, people haven't had the opportunity to ask me that. So it got asked a lot in the last few months. And then little did I know that he was so ill. And then he passed away and I just felt terrible. I just felt terrible that we had been talking about it or whatever, I just feel really sad. He's such an incredible player, but such a really warm, sweet, just a good person, just a good guy, just trying to find his way. I watched something on YouTube the other day about the American Dream. They somewhere in California, they had him and they interviewed him about, his family was the American Dream story. And it's such a great story because his mother was Indonesian, his father was Dutch, and it's unreal. And his father was a musician, a great musician. And so it was nice to just hear him talk about that. He told me a lot about it. I knew, we spoke a lot right after his father died. And, I was always trying to sort of help him in any way I could as far as, trying not to have him, whatever troubles he was having. But it really devastated him when his dad died. So, I think his mom is still alive. I'm not even sure, but it's just very sad for Valerie, for his now wife, and for his son. So it's just a big loss.
If you were if you were going to explain to a non-musician what made him a great guitarist, a non-musician would say, "Well, I really loved Eruption." How would you explain it?
Luckily, I watched that interview because what he, like necessity is the mother of invention. And he was classically trained as a piano player because his father was a musician. His mother wanted them to be classic, was smart enough to know that music would probably keep them out of trouble. They were two boys. They both played, and then they started entering competitions and winning. And so they probably brought home some extra money that way. And then I think it was he wanted to play drums, and he bought a drum set. And then one day he came home, and I guess Alex got a guitar, and he came home, and Alex was playing the drums, and he was playing the drums well, and he had been failing at the drums. So he said, "Oh, maybe I'll try the guitar." And he gets the guitar, and then he wants to do all these things on this guitar he has, but he can't. So he starts inventing, and he literally did invent various pickups, which I don't know the name of them now. And he said, "I ruined a bunch of really good guitars trying to figure out, because I didn't have the money for the pedals, because everybody had pedals to create all these sounds. And he liked the whammy bar on the Fender. And so he needed to make the Fender do, like him and Les Paul have a lot in common, interestingly enough. So for me, the way that he just came out of complete left field and just did something, it's sort of like Hendrix, like a completely different instrument it became in the hands of Jimi Hendrix and in the hands of Eddie Van Halen. And even though he loved, Eric Clapton and Jeff Beck, they were just sort of straight ahead playing. And he said in this interview, well, after a while, I had seen enough of Eric Clapton. He was great, but, that wasn't moving me anymore. And he, interesting like me, didn't listen to a lot of music. Like after a certain point, I just stopped listening to music. It just was like, I got music out. And I think when you're writing and playing all the time, when you stop, you don't want to listen to music. You kind of just want to hear the silence. And it was funny because he said that also. But I mean, the answer to the question is, like I said, he created, he may as well, and basically did create a whole new instrument.
So, well, then I got to ask, I would have loved a Patty Smyth Van Halen. Why did you go in a different direction?
I mean, again, I called this record It's About Time, because it's about time I put out a record, and it's kind of a record about time. But, timing is so important in life. And at the time that he said to me, I have to know, I was 8 months pregnant and in New York and had a plan for my next record. I was deeply entrenched with my label, the next record. I just got married. And the thought of, I was like, I will never move to California. Meanwhile, I have a home in California. I've spent, a lot of time there since 1990. I did move there, like 5 years later or something. But at that time, I was like, I can't move to California and just blow up my life. I can't do it. And I think my mindset was just, I got to hunker down and have this kid. And I think that was the reason. And it's semantics too. I think if he said, why don't you just make a record? Come out with me. Let's make a record. Let's see what happens. And then I could have gone out there for a few months. That would have been like, I have to move to California and I have to change everything in my life. And I didn't want to. I was very flippant in a way and, impulsive. I said, no, I didn't even pause. So I was like, no, I don't think so. And believe me, I regretted that, for a few years there, I was like, what the hell is wrong with you? Why didn't you even think it through? They're having all this massive giant tour and, and hit records. And I was like, damn it. But then, you know what? Again, it's like, it just works out the way it's supposed to work out. They made a good record with Sammy, and I went on my road again to write Sometimes Love and No Mistakes, all these songs that I'm really proud of, and I wouldn't have written. Would I have loved to have made a record with him at the very least? Absolutely. And I wish that we had. But, again, it's just timing.
And let's be honest. I mean, you had officially rejected California back in 1969.
Yes, I had.
You had said no.
That is exactly right. And I was holding to my guns, sticking to my guns on that one. I just was like, no. And, they fought all the time, the brothers and stuff. And I just was like, when you're literally that heavy with child, and I was close to giving birth, it's like you're just thinking, I need, to be in a quiet place right now or whatever. It just wasn't, you're not even thinking right when you're pregnant. You're slightly, handicapped mentally when you're pregnant. So there were, I have to take that into consideration too.
Well, Patty, Van Halen or not, we've all been very fortunate to share your musical journey over these last few decades. Thanks for being today's guest on Everything Fab Four. Everything Fab Four is presented by Salon.com, the premier news, politics, innovation, and arts website. For more information, visit everythingfab4.com, where you can learn more about our podcast and my latest Beatles-related book, Living the Beatles Legend, The Untold Story of Mal Evans. The Everything Fab Four theme song, Seize the Day, is provided courtesy of Black Rabbit, the high-octane Beatles cover band, an innovative psychedelic rock project from Rockaway Beach, Queens in New York City. Like what you heard today on Everything Fab Four? Be sure to subscribe, give us a rating, and recommend the show to your friends. Plus, you can follow us on Facebook and Twitter at EF4 Podcast. Distributed by Salon.com, Everything Fab Four is a Wonderwall production. Remember, it's a Beatles world, and everyone has a story.